He always thought he was careful, slipping out at night, erasing messages, leaving no trace behind. But the night the siren stopped outside our house, I learned that secrets don't stay silent forever. Sometimes they stick to the light in ways no one can predict. For 12 years, I believed my marriage to Daniel was built on something steady. Small rituals, shared mornings, the quiet language of familiarity. We lived in a weather-worn 2-story house at the edge of a modest Pennsylvania town, the kind where gossip travels faster than the fog across the fields. I worked from home, Daniel worked late, and most nights ended in tired silence. But lately, that silence felt different, stretched thin, hiding something beneath it. I didn't know what I would find, only that the truth had begun to knock softly at the edges of my life. Before we dive in, don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Let's see just how far this story can travel across the globe. The house was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that has weight to it. I remember the light falling across our bedroom, thin, winter pale, touching only the edges of the dresser like it was afraid to go farther. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't even thinking. I just reached into the drawer for a spare pen, the way I had 100 times before, but my fingers brushed against something smooth, something colder than everything around it, and that's when my heart paused, just long enough to hear the silence settle in, just long enough to know the drawer held more than a pen. Our bedroom always felt lived in, softened by years of small routines. My hand cream on the nightstand, his loose change scattered in a shallow dish, the quilt my aunt made years ago fading along the seams. Nothing in that room ever surprised me. Daniel and I weren't perfect. We drifted into that quiet married rhythm where days blur. But we were steady, predictable. So when I pulled the drawer open, I expected the usual things. Old receipts he never threw away, the faded bookmark he swore he'd use again, a tie clip from his father. They were all there, stacked exactly as I remembered. But tucked beneath the corner of those receipts was a new shape. A bottle, small, unfamiliar, like it didn't belong to him or to us. The label was slick, clinical. Not the kind of thing he and I ever kept around. I picked it up slowly, almost expecting it to vanish or explain itself. The room changed as soon as it touched my hand. The light felt colder. The air is tighter, as if the house itself sensed something I hadn't caught up to yet. And I remember standing there, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, wondering why something so small could feel like the beginning of a crack in the wall. What was I holding? And why did it feel wrong? I turned the bottle in my hand, watching the way. The light caught the plastic. No scent, no clue, just a manufactured promise on a label I didn't recognize. It didn't look dangerous. It didn't look meaningful. But something inside me tightened anyway. Daniel had many flaws. Forgetting dates, leaving socks everywhere, losing his keys. But he wasn't secretive. At least, I thought he wasn't. I traced my thumb over the edge of the bottle cap, feeling a soft, rubbery texture that seemed too new, too intentional, like it had been bought recently, like it had been used. My mind searched for harmless explanations. Maybe it was for back pain, maybe something at the gym, maybe someone at work recommended it. But the guesses felt thin, stretched, like they didn't want to hold the weight of truth. A tiny tremor moved through my chest. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. Recognition of a shift so quiet it almost didn't exist. I placed the bottle on the edge of the bedspread and looked around the room, trying to match it with anything familiar. Nothing fit. Even the drawer, with its clutter of forgotten items, looked suddenly curated, like he'd placed the bottle there with just enough care to pretend it wasn't hidden, but also pretend he didn't expect me to find it. What kind of object lives in the space between hiding and pretending? I picked up the bottle again, this time more slowly, feeling the weight of it settle into my palm. It wasn't heavy, just enough to remind me it was real, and as I held it, something inside me tilted. Not a loud moment, not a dramatic realization, just the smallest shift, like a thread pulling loose from a sweater. Memories flickered through my mind. Daniel coming home later than usual, his smile shorter, his eyes drifting past mine instead of toward them. Little things I'd brushed aside because marriages have seasons, because people get tired, because I wanted to believe we were still us. But standing there with that bottle, the pieces arranged themselves without my permission, not a full picture, just the outline of one. And the outline felt like betrayal. The room felt colder, the air uneven, like I was inside someone else's life. I didn't unscrew the cap, I didn't need to. The bottle itself was enough, a symbol, a question, a warning. My fingers tightened around it instinctively, as if squeezing it would force the truth out. But the truth doesn't come out that easily. It waits. It watches. It lets you feel the first tremor before it shows its full shape. I placed the bottle back beneath the receipts, exactly as I found it. But nothing about me felt the same. When I closed the drawer, the soft thud echoed louder than it should have. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the wood grain, tracing the faint scratches Daniel made when he moved in years ago. Everything looked normal. Everything felt wrong. A small, unspoken line had been crossed. Not by me, but by whatever that bottle represented. And though I didn't yet know what it meant, I felt it settle inside me like a cold stone dropped in still water. Ripples spreading, quiet certain. I walked out of the room slowly, leaving the light off behind me. But the weight of that drawer followed me down the hallway step by step, as if whispering, "What did you just find? And why was it waiting for you?" On the nights he came home late, the house felt different. Not louder, just thinner, like the walls were holding their breath, waiting to see what version of Daniel would walk through the door. Some evenings, I'd hear his key scrape against the lock 3-4 times before he managed to turn it. Other nights, he slipped in quietly, as if he didn't want to wake the truth. And every time I heard his footsteps cross the hallway, slower than they used to be, I felt something inside me shift, like a chair being pulled back from a table no one sat at anymore. We used to end our days with the same small rituals, him hanging his jacket on the staircase rail instead of the hook, me reminding him to eat something before bed. Those habits felt like marriage, imperfect, predictable. But that month, the evenings took on a different shape. The staircase light stayed off longer. His car idled in the driveway before shutting down, and the front door opened not with the warmth of someone finally home, but with the caution of someone entering a space that wasn't theirs anymore. I'd sit at the dining table with a book open but unread, letting my eyes trace the same sentence until the letters blurred. Sometimes I'd hear a strange perfume before I heard him. Floral, sharp, too young for me and too new for him. He never used to smell like anything but sawdust and the faint hint of old aftershave. The house noticed before I did. The clocks ticked louder. The floorboards pressed a little deeper beneath my steps. Even the kitchen light buzzed like it wanted to speak. Maybe that's why I kept pretending things were normal, because the house seemed to be watching us unravel, and I wasn't ready to meet its gaze. One evening, I set out dinner for us like always. Roasted chicken, soft rolls, the same meal he used to call his comfort plate. He walked in long after it had cooled, laughter slipping out of him in a way that didn't belong to anything in our home. It was sharp, careless, like he was still standing somewhere else, telling someone else a story meant only for them. He paused when he saw me, the laughter dying mid-breath. "Long day," he said, shrugging out of his jacket. But when he leaned down to kiss my cheek, I caught it again. That perfume too sweet, clinging to him like a secret. We sat at opposite ends of the table. He ate quickly, barely chewing, staring past me toward the window. Outside, the street lamp flickered, casting a thin yellow glow across the glass. He seemed entranced by it, as if the light was calling him somewhere I didn't have access to. I tried to ask about work, about his day, about anything that could pull him back into the room with me. His answers were short, scattered, a nod, a hum, a half smile that didn't touch his eyes, and the whole time he kept glancing at his phone, face down, vibrating softly against the table. With each buzz, a little more of him drifted away. There's a moment in every unraveling where you realize you've been pretending not to see the threads coming loose. For me, it happened halfway through dinner, when his fork slipped from his hand and clattered against the plate. He didn't apologize. He didn't look at me. He just laughed again, quietly under his breath. The same laugh he'd carried in from outside. Something in me tightened, like the air had lost its softness. I watched him reach for his napkin, his fingers trembling just slightly, and I wondered when those hands had last been steady in mine. When he finally looked up, his eyes slid over me, not into me, the way a person glances at a stranger on a bus, just long enough to be polite. The truth didn't shout. It whispered. And it whispered through every small gesture, the perfume, the glances at the phone, the distant laughter, the quiet rush to leave the room after he finished eating. "Going to shower," he said, pushing back from the table. His chair legs scraped the floor, a long, dragging sound that felt like a statement. I watched him walk toward the bathroom, his shoulders curved inward, his steps heavy. He closed the door softly, but the latch clicked like a warning. That's when it sank in. Not all at once, but gently, like settling dust. Marriages don't break in storms. They break routine. In small, ordinary moments you almost don't catch. After he disappeared into the bathroom, I stayed at the table, tracing the ring his glass had left behind. The house felt colder again, like it had pulled away from us the same way he had. Outside, the street lamp buzzed one last time before going still. I stared at the empty chair across from me, the place where Daniel used to sit with ease, where our conversations once lingered long after dinner was done. Now it looked like a space waiting to be filled by someone who had already left in every way but physically. I closed my eyes and breathed in the faint scent of that unfamiliar perfume still hanging in the air. It felt like the quiet beginning of an ending I wasn't ready to name. The morning light was thin when I found it, the kind of pale gold that slips quietly through glass, careful not to disturb anything while still deciding whether to wake. I had climbed into Daniel's truck to move it from the driveway so the delivery van could pass, nothing more. But when I reached across the seat for the keys he'd forgotten, my fingers brushed a softness that didn't belong in that old, dust-coated cab. A whisper of fabric, just enough to make me pause, just enough to make the air shift around me, like truth itself had cleared its throat. Daniel's truck was a world of its own. Metal, dust, the faint smell of motor oil soaked deep into the seats. He never let anyone else drive it, not because he cared about the truck, but because it was his space, the one place untouched by the routines of our house. I climbed in that morning expecting the usual clutter, a stray receipt, an old coffee cup rolling on the floor, a forgotten pair of gloves. But the cabin felt different, warmer somehow, like someone else's presence had lingered just long enough to leave a trace. I sat there for a moment with his key in my hand, listening to the low hum of distant traffic and the soft chirping of sparrows in the yard. The day was barely beginning, and already something felt unsettled, like a page turning itself before I was ready. When I reached toward the back seat to shift a stack of jackets so the rear view wouldn't be blocked, my hand brushed something that didn't match the rough textures around it. A fabric too smooth, a color too soft, a scent too familiar in the way unfamiliar things are. Intrusive, sharp, unmistakably feminine. I froze, because in a truck like Daniel's, nothing soft should exist unless someone brought it there. I pulled the scarf toward me slowly, as if it were something alive that might break or flutter away. Lavender, a shade I'd never worn, a shade no one close to us ever wore either. The sunlight caught on the threads, making them shimmer in a way that felt almost cruel, like it wanted me to see everything, every detail, every quiet truth woven through it. I laid the scarf across my lap, smoothing it with my palm. It was delicate, almost weightless, but it settled against me with the heaviness of something undeniable. The cab of the truck suddenly felt too small, too crowded with a presence I couldn't name. Perfume, faint but lingering, rose from the fabric. Not mine, not even close. I lifted it closer to my face, not to inhale it, but to make myself accept what my heart already knew. This wasn't a forgotten item from a friend. This wasn't from a coworker needing a ride. This wasn't an accident. It was an imprint, a memory of someone else, a quiet, soft, lavender-colored truth. I sat there, staring at the windshield, seeing nothing but the reflection of my own eyes, steady, dry, but shifted in a way I could feel deep in my chest. This was the kind of evidence life gives you, not in storms, but in whispers. And whispers, when held long enough, turn into revelations. I don't know how long I sat there with the scarf in my hands. Time felt different, stretched thin, like it didn't want to touch the moment too directly. The neighborhood carried on around me. A dog barking 2 houses down, someone slamming a trash bin, the low rumble of a passing truck. But the sounds felt far away, drowned beneath the quiet roar of realization settling in. I thought back to the changing nights, the laughter he carried home that didn't belong to us, the perfume that clung to him like a story whispered against his neck, the distant look in his eyes at dinner, always drifting past me toward a different world. I had brushed those things aside, telling myself, people go through phases, that marriages breathe and shift. Maybe he was just tired, but a scarf doesn't lie. A scarf doesn't get confused or tired or distracted. A scarf doesn't wander into the back seat of a man's truck unless someone leaves it there, someone comfortable enough to remove it, comfortable enough to forget it. I let my fingers drift along the edge of the fabric, feeling the softness give way beneath my touch. It felt intimate in ways Daniel and I hadn't been in months. It felt placed, claimed, and that's what settled inside me. Not anger, not devastation, just a slow, quiet understanding that betrayal doesn't announce itself. It waits patiently, tucked beneath receipts, hidden beneath jackets, until the moment you reach for a truth you didn't know you were searching for. What else had been waiting? The scarf lay folded over my knees, catching the morning light through the cracked windshield. A gentle breeze drifted in through the open window, lifting one delicate corner of it, as if urging me to look, truly look, at what I'd found. I placed it beside me on the passenger seat, its presence impossibly loud for something so quiet. The truck smelled of lavender now, of someone else's laughter, of a truth I couldn't unsee. I turned the key in the ignition, hand steady but not calm. The engine rumbled awake, but the sound felt distant, overshadowed by the soft weight of fabric still echoing in my lap. As I backed out of the driveway, I whispered to myself, if this was left here, what else was left just out of sight? The house felt different after midnight, softer, almost weightless, like it had slipped into a version of itself that only existed after everyone else had gone still. I sat on the edge of our bed, the floor cold beneath my feet, listening to the wind move through the half-open window. It carried the scent of damp leaves, a whisper of the world outside, reminding me that everything keeps moving even when your life has paused. The bottle in the drawer wasn't far from me, just wood and hinges away. Yet it felt closer than anything Daniel had said or done in months. Close enough to make my breath quiet, close enough to make the truth feel inevitable. Our bedroom had always been a place of rest, or at least it used to be. Now the shadows felt longer, stretching across the quilt in shapes that didn't belong to us. The lamp on my side table cast a warm, tired glow that flickered when the wind pressed against the house. It was the only light in the room, and it made everything look more honest, more fragile. Daniel was asleep on the couch downstairs. He'd mumbled something earlier about falling asleep during the late-night game, but the truth, the real truth, had settled between us so thickly that the words didn't matter. He didn't want to sleep next to me, and I didn't have the strength to ask him why. I pulled my knees closer to my chest, trying to make myself smaller in a room that suddenly felt too big. The scarf in his truck still lingered in my memory, its soft lavender scent clinging to my clothes like a reminder I couldn't wash away. But tonight wasn't about the scarf. Not exactly. Tonight was about what it meant. The wind brushed the curtains gently, a small, steady rhythm like the world breathing in and out. Somewhere beneath it, I felt my own heartbeat slowing, settling into something that wasn't anger, something quieter, something sharper. It was almost 3 a.m. when I finally reached toward the drawer, not quickly, just slowly enough to feel every inch of hesitation leave my fingertips. The handle was cool, steady, as if it didn't care what waited inside. The drawer slid open with a soft scrape, a sound that felt too loud in the sleeping house. There it was, the bottle. Sitting in the same place I'd left it days earlier, tucked between old receipts and the past life I thought we still shared. It looked harmless in the lamplight, almost small, almost shy. But it carried a weight that had shifted something inside me the moment I found it. I picked it up again, letting the plastic warm against my palm. I didn't twist the cap, I didn't sniff it, I didn't even read the label again. I just held it, letting the truth sit quietly between my fingers. A part of me wondered if all of this was in my head, if the scarf, the perfume, the late nights could all be explained with reasons I hadn't heard yet. But the silence in the room told me otherwise. Silence doesn't lie. Silence waits for you to recognize what's been there all along. And in that silence, I felt the beginnings of a decision forming. Slow, deliberate, like dawn pushing its first soft light through a thick layer of clouds. Clarity doesn't always arrive with certainty. Sometimes it comes with exhaustion, with stillness, with the understanding that your heart has stopped arguing with itself. I placed the bottle on the quilt beside me, watching how it sat there, innocent, guilty, both and neither. A symbol of everything I didn't know, and everything I suddenly did. I didn't want revenge, not even justice in the loud, righteous sense. What I wanted was truth, the real kind, the kind that shows up uninvited and makes you redefine what you thought you knew. And truth rarely walks through the front door. It filters in slowly, through late-night silence, through forgotten bottles, through lavender scarves left in trucks where they never should have been. My decision wasn't a single moment. It was a collection of small, quiet acceptances. He was hiding things. He was drifting. He wasn't mine in the way he used to be, and I needed to know how far the lie reached, where it started, where it ended, and what would happen when it finally broke. The wind pushed the curtain again, a soft exhale against the room. It felt like the house understood something I hadn't said aloud. It felt like permission. So I closed the drawer. But not the decision. That stayed open. I turned off the lamp and let the room fall into darkness, the bottle's shape fading into the shadows. The quiet didn't scare me anymore. It felt honest. I lay back on the bed, the sheets cool beneath me, my eyes tracing the faint outline of moonlight on the ceiling. Downstairs, the couch creaked softly. Maybe from Daniel shifting in his sleep, maybe from the house settling into its truth. I exhaled slowly, letting the night settle around me like a blanket I didn't ask for but needed. A single thought echoed in the stillness, steady and unhurried. How far can a lie stretch before it finally tears? Sleep didn't come easily, but clarity did, and by morning I knew the truth wouldn't stay hidden much longer. The afternoon light slanted across the bedroom floor in thin, dusty strips when I opened the drawer again. It wasn't a dramatic moment, just a quiet one. The kind of moment that feels like it's been waiting for you, patient and unblinking. My hand hovered over the bottle, and for a second I wondered if it would feel different, heavier, warmer, guilty somehow. Instead, it felt light, almost weightless, like it didn't understand the trouble it carried. The house was silent behind me, the kind of silence that listens more than it rests. I lifted the bottle anyway, feeling something inside me settle into place, slow and certain. It had been days since I found the scarf, days since the truth began brushing its fingertips against the edges of my life. I'd gone through every motion since then, waking up, cooking breakfast, answering emails, but everything felt slightly out of focus, like the world had shifted half an inch to the left. Daniel didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and he preferred the silence. His nights stayed long. His laughter stayed strange, and the perfume on his clothes became as familiar as the smell of our laundry detergent. Most evenings he avoided the bedroom altogether. He'd mutter something about bad sleep or late shows and disappear to the couch. I didn't follow. I didn't ask. Instead, I kept quiet, letting the air thicken around us. But tonight, the quiet wasn't enough. It didn't soothe. It didn't distract. I opened the drawer because something inside me was done waiting, done pretending, done hoping he would wander back into the truth on his own. The bottle sat where I'd left it, tucked among the remnants of a life that suddenly felt borrowed. I picked it up with both hands this time, not gently, not harshly, just firmly enough to feel the beginning of a choice forming beneath my skin. I unscrewed the cap slowly, expecting something, a scent, a hint, a clue. But the moment the seal broke, nothing rose from the bottle. No perfume, no chemical sting, just a faint, clinical emptiness, the kind that belongs in hospitals or cheap motel drawers. I tilted it toward the light, watching the liquid cling to the sides, thin and almost translucent. Nothing about it matched the life Daniel and I shared, or the man I thought he was. My fingers tightened slightly around the bottle, not out of anger. I wasn't sure I had that in me anymore, but out of understanding. If he could alter our life in secrets, then I could alter this small corner of his, not to hurt him, not to punish, but to see what the truth looked like when it finally touched him back. I walked downstairs, each step slow, measured, like I was descending into a different version of myself. The utility drawer opened with a familiar squeak. Inside was a bottle of clear, tacky repair adhesive, something I'd bought months ago to fix a broken planter. I held it next to the one from upstairs. Same consistency, same transparency, same possibility. A strange calm washed over me, the kind that comes when a decision finally clicks into place. Quiet, steady, almost ancient in its simplicity. I poured the adhesive into the bottle he kept hidden, watching it pool softly at the bottom like a truth finding its shape. It made no sound, no mess, just a slow, obedient shift from one container to another. My hands didn't shake. My breath stayed even. It felt less like revenge and more like a conversation. One he had started without me. One I was finally responding to. When I screwed the cap back on, a soft click echoed through the kitchen. It sounded final somehow, like a curtain falling or a boundary being drawn in chalk across old tile. I walked back upstairs, the house quiet around me, the kind of quiet that respects what it doesn't fully understand. In the bedroom, the bottle reflected the lamplight in a way it hadn't before. Sharper, clearer, almost too honest. I placed it exactly where he had hidden it, between the receipts, under the old bookmark. Beside the tie clip he no longer wore, the drawer slid shut with a small sigh, as if relieved to hold the secret again. But the room felt still, not peaceful, not tense, just balanced, like a scale that had finally evened out under the weight of something inevitable. And in that stillness, a single question whispered its way through me. What happens when deception meets resistance? I stood in the dim light of the bedroom, the wind pushing softly against the window pane. For a moment, I let my eyes rest on the drawer. Closed now, quiet, holding more than wood and hinges should ever hold. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed. A car passed. Life continued in its usual rhythm, but something inside the house had shifted. Not loudly, not violently, but in the way a tide shifts long before the waves make it to shore. I turned off the lamp and let the darkness move in, gentle and unafraid. Lying back against the cool sheets, I felt the faint echo of my own heartbeat settle into a steady, thoughtful pace. Whatever happened next, the truth would no longer be silent, and neither would I. Friday nights used to mean something in our house. Takeout on the coffee table, a movie we never finished, the soft comfort of knowing the week was finally behind us. But that night, the front door opened long after the streetlights had gone quiet, and Daniel stepped inside humming a tune I didn't recognize. He didn't look at me, just walked past with the careless softness of someone arriving somewhere temporary, not home. The air shifted behind him, carrying a faint perfume that didn't belong to me or to this house. I sat very still as he climbed the stairs, each footstep sinking like a slow heartbeat into the wood. The living room was dim except for the lamp beside the sofa, its warm glow falling across the carpet like a faded memory. I hadn't expected him home early, but I hadn't expected him this late either. That was the thing about the new version of Daniel. Every entrance felt unpredictable, and every silence felt intentional. I stayed curled on the couch with a blanket draped over my legs, pretending to read the same paragraph over and over. Outside, a cold wind rattled the window pane, making the house feel even more hollow. He tossed his keys onto the table with a soft clatter. A sound that used to mean, "I'm finally home." Now it sounded like a warning. He walked past me without slowing, without glancing, without even giving the small, habitual nod he used to offer when words felt too heavy. A hum drifted from his throat. Something light, almost cheerful, out of place in the stillness of the room. I watched his back as he disappeared up the stairs, a sinking feeling tightening beneath my ribcage. It wasn't the lateness. It wasn't humming. It was the unspoken knowing, the kind that comes when your home feels suddenly occupied. A few minutes later, floorboards creaked above me in slow, searching intervals. Daniel moved around the bedroom with footsteps too measured, too mindful, like he wasn't alone, like he was trying not to disturb whoever shared the air with him. Then I heard it. A voice. Soft. Feminine. Barely above a whisper. But there. My breath caught, more from recognition than surprise. It was the same type of softness I had smelled on him for weeks, a scent woven into scarves and late-night shadows. I muted the lamp switch with my thumb, letting the room fall into darkness so the sound would carry clearer. The voice came through again, muffled by distance and floorboards, as if someone was on speakerphone, leaning close. Daniel's tone changed too, lower, quicker. Not the tone of a husband calling to say goodnight from the next room, the tone of someone performing a life outside the walls he shared with me. The fridge hummed behind me, filling the silence between their sentences, and the house seemed to shrink, drawing everything upward into the room where they spoke. I pressed my palms against my knees to keep them steady. A part of me wanted to stand, to go upstairs, to fling open the door and force truth into the open. But another part, the quieter, older part, stayed rooted, listening to the pieces fall exactly where they were meant to. Sometimes the truth reveals itself without your help. Then it happened. A sound so small yet so defining that it pulled the air straight from my lungs. Click. A lock. On our bedroom door. A lock he had never once used in all the years we had lived there. The kind of lock meant to keep something in, or keep someone out. The silence that followed the click pressed against the walls like a held breath, tightening the air around me. My mind replayed the muffled voice, the hum in his throat, the late nights, the lavender scarf. All of it suddenly made sense in the simplest, cruelest way. He hadn't just brought his secret into the house. He had carried it up the stairs, into our room, closed the door, and locked it. My heartbeat thudded softly in my ears. Not fast, just steady, like it understood something I hadn't allowed myself to admit until now. Upstairs, I heard his soft laugh, the one he used to reserve for me on early mornings, when sunlight made everything look gentler. Hearing it in a locked room with someone else, even through a phone, felt like watching a memory rot in real time. I didn't cry, didn't move, didn't speak. I just stared at the ceiling as the truth settled over me like dust, quiet and undeniable. The life I had been holding together with hope had already unraveled. He had simply closed the door on the last thread. The house eventually fell quiet. The voice gone, his footsteps muted, the door still locked. I stayed on the couch with the lamp off, letting the dark stretch across my shoulders like a heavy shawl. Outside, a car drove past, headlights washing briefly over the room before fading into nothing. I pressed my fingers against the blanket and felt the faint, trembling cold beneath them. It wasn't fear. It wasn't a shock. Just a quiet acknowledgement of something already broken. The ceiling creaked once, softly, like the house itself was sighing. And in that moment, a single thought drifted through me. Steady, inevitable. If he could lock the door to our room, what else had he already shut me out of? It began with a sound that didn't belong in our house. Not laughter, not footsteps, just a dull thud, sharp enough to slice through the quiet like a knife dropped on tile. I looked up from the living room floor where I'd been gathering scattered mail, my breath caught halfway between inhale and memory. Another sound followed, a strained groan, muted but unmistakably human, and unmistakably wrong. The house seemed to lean in with me, every wall tightening with the same question I held in my chest. Something had shifted upstairs. Something that didn't match the lies Daniel had been stitching together for months. The night had been still until then. Cold air pressed against the windows, and the street outside was quiet in that heavy winter way, when even passing cars seemed softer, as though muffled by the dark. I had been trying to keep myself busy, sorting bills, stacking envelopes, pretending the locked bedroom door upstairs didn't exist, pretending the faint hum of a woman's voice from earlier hadn't threaded itself through the floorboards. Daniel's coat was still slung over the banister, smelling faintly of perfume that didn't belong to me. His shoes pointed toward the stairs in a way that made them look like they were ready to run, but he hadn't run. Not tonight. He had taken his secrets into our bedroom and locked the door behind him, leaving me downstairs with the hollow echo of what used to be our marriage. When the thud sounded again, heavier, louder, I stood slowly, feeling a tightness build in my chest. The house felt suddenly awake, its old bones alert and listening. I walked toward the staircase but stopped at the bottom step, one hand resting on the cold wood of the railing. The quiet stretched long enough for me to feel my pulse in my fingertips. Then came the groan, low, pained, not the sound of someone comfortable or careless, whatever had been happening behind that locked door. It wasn't smooth anymore. Something had fractured. The groan sharpened into something closer to a choke, a strained, panicked sound that scraped through the silence. I held the railing, frozen in place, unsure if I was bracing myself or the house. A whisper followed, frantic, breathless. Words I couldn't make out, spoken in a voice that didn't belong to either me or Daniel. Then his voice, hushed, shaky, no longer the confident murmur he had used earlier when he thought I wasn't listening. I strained my ears, but all I caught was the tone. Fear, urgency, something slipping out of his control. Another thud hit the door, sending a light tremor through the air. The knocks that followed weren't soft or polite. They were desperate. "Daniel!" A woman's voice gasped through the wood, barely audible but real enough to freeze me in place. It wasn't a name said with affection. It was one dragged out of panic. He hissed something back at her, sharp, frantic. And I caught the scrape of feet against carpet, the clatter of something falling to the floor. The entire upstairs felt like a shaken bottle, pressure building beneath my feet. I didn't move, didn't climb the stairs, didn't make a sound. I simply listened, my breath thin, my heart steady in its disbelief. There are moments in life when you realize truth does not need your permission to arrive. This was one of them. The knocks turned into pounding. Open-handed slaps against the locked door, each one sharper than the last. Her voice rose again, strangled with fear. And over it all, Daniel's voice broke. Not in anger, not even in impatience, in panic. "No, wait," he gasped, the words tumbling over themselves. Then, clear as daylight, he said her name. A name I didn't know, a name spoken too intimately with too much urgency, too much history to be a mistake. Hearing it was like watching a photograph burn, slowly edges curling inward, the image losing shape until all that remained was ash. I didn't cry, I didn't rush up the stairs to confront him, I didn't even flinch. I just stood there letting the moment wash over me. A strange, heavy calm settled deep inside my chest, the kind that arrives when denial finally lets go. The house exhaled with me, as though it had been holding truth in its walls for months and could finally release it. The pounding dulled into muffled thuds, then into frantic shuffling, then into silence so complete it pressed against my ears. A lie can stretch itself thin over time, but when it snaps, it doesn't do so quietly. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, understanding fully, painfully that something had torn. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, almost disorienting. Only the faint hum of the heater moved through the house, soft and tired. I stayed where I was, fingers still curled around the railing, my feet planted on the cold wood. Upstairs, no one spoke. Not him, not her. Only the settling creak of floorboards, the house adjusting to its new reality. A truth had revealed itself without me lifting a single finger. Somewhere in that quiet, I felt a small, steady shift inside me. Not rage, not heartbreak, just the beginning of something inevitable. As I stepped back from the stairs, the question slipped through my mind, soft as a breath. What happens now, when a lie traps itself and has nowhere left to hide? The first voice I heard wasn't his. It was hers, thin, shaking, barely threaded together, leaking through the bedroom wall like a secret finally too heavy to hold. I was still sitting on the couch, hands folded in my lap, when her words broke into the house in broken pieces. "Please, please, we need help." The quiet swallowed her voice as soon as she said it, but the damage was done. The house no longer felt like mine. It felt like a witness. And in that moment, with the clock ticking too loudly and the air standing still, I realized the night had shifted into something I couldn't stop, and didn't need to. The living room glowed faintly in the warm light of the corner lamp, but it felt dimmer than usual, as though the bulb knew something I didn't. I sat motionless on the couch, listening to the weight of the house settle around me, every beam and nail still reacting to the pounding and shouting that had happened moments earlier. Upstairs, the frantic scrambling had quieted into ragged breathing and muffled whimpers. The bedroom door was still locked. The woman is still inside. Daniel is still with her. The scent of lavender drifted down the stairs in soft, cruel waves. It mixed with the stale air of the house, making everything feel crowded, suffocating. The kind of air that reminds you of everything you've lost without ever saying a word. I didn't know exactly what had gone wrong behind that door, but I didn't need to. Some truths introduce themselves without explanation. Some nights unravel without permission. The woman's trembling voice rose again, just loud enough for me to hear the panic crack inside it. No, he can't, please, Her words tangled, slipping into a sob. I closed my eyes and let the sound settle like dust across my chest. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't a pleasure. Just a quiet acceptance of what happens when lies distort themselves into corners too small to breathe in. A sudden beep echoed from upstairs, a phone being dialed with shaking hands. Then her voice, cracked and helpless, stretched through the stillness. "Please, we need an ambulance." Every word fell heavily through the ceiling, landing between us like the pieces of a shattered life. She gave the dispatcher our address. Her breaths came in short, broken bursts. Daniel's voice was low, frantic, too panicked to hide anything anymore. The dispatcher's calm instructions washed down the staircase like cold water. "Ma'am, I need you to stay with me. Tell me what's happening. Is he conscious?" The steadiness of the dispatcher made the chaos upstairs feel louder, more real, more exposed. I didn't move. My body stayed rooted to the couch, hands still folded neatly, as though the only thing keeping me upright was the memory of who I had been before tonight. The silence in the house grew tighter while she answered questions through her tears. Daniel's footsteps thudded in irregular patterns. Pacing, stumbling, panicking. I could picture him, palms sweating, hair a mess, eyes wild with a fear he'd never shown me. And for the first time, I realized something simple and sharp. A lie never collapses gracefully. It thrashes, it begs. It tries to hold the pieces together with trembling fingers until the last possible second. Tonight his lie had run out of places to hide. Then, faint at first, the sound reached me. A distant siren, thin, growing. The woman must have heard it too, because her voice lifted with a flicker of hope. "They're coming! Please hurry!" Her words trembled, carried by fear and something else, something eerily familiar. Regret. The sirens grew louder, splitting the quiet street with their rising howl. Blue and red lights flashed against the walls before the vehicles even stopped, washing the room in shifting colors, like the truth flickering on and off in the dark. For a moment, I watched the lights glide across my hands, my wedding ring catching a brief flash of red. The sight of it, red on gold, felt strangely symbolic, like the house had finally decided to tell the story out loud. Car doors slammed outside, boots hit pavement, voices approached, brisk and efficient. Neighbors stepped onto their porches, silhouettes forming behind curtains. The hum of curiosity drifted through the neighborhood, low, steady, inevitable. Secrets have gravity, and tonight ours had pulled everyone in. I kept breathing, quiet, steady, detached from the chaos unfolding just a floor above me. As the paramedics climbed the steps, Daniel's desperate voice cracked again, a tone I had never heard from him before, one full of fear, but not for me. And that truth was the final shift I needed to understand. Whatever had been between us was gone long before the sirens arrived. The front window flashed red, then blue, then red again. Soft pulses sweeping across the room like a heartbeat out of rhythm. I watched the colors dance across the furniture, painting the walls with a story the house already knew. Outside, neighbors whispered behind their hands. The paramedics disappeared inside, their footsteps thunderous compared to my stillness. I didn't rise, didn't look toward the stairs, didn't brace myself. I just sat there letting the emergency lights wash over me, letting the truth finally illuminate what denial had tried so hard to dim. Some nights end quietly. Others arrive in sirens and colors. And as the lights flickered through the blinds, I breathed out one thought, steady and calm. How do you prepare for a truth that only reveals itself under flashing red and blue? The pounding shook the house before it shook me. A fist, heavy, deliberate, struck the bedroom door upstairs with the force of someone who didn't have time for hesitation. I'd heard knocks before, but never like this. Never from people who arrived with sirens and urgency instead of excuses. I stayed on the couch, My breath held somewhere just beneath my ribs. The firefighters' boots thudded against the floor, a rhythm that didn't belong to this house or this life, but somehow fit the moment too well. Their voices were low, practiced, steady. The kind of steadiness meant for scenes just like this one. The red and blue light still flickered through the blinds, casting restless shadows along the walls. The living room felt colder than it had earlier, though the heater hummed steadily. A soft reminder of normalcy that no longer applied. I sat where I'd been all night, hands folded neatly in my lap, watching the colors shift across my skin like pieces of a story I hadn't written. Upstairs, the voices grew clearer. The firefighters spoke with authority, urgency wrapped in calm, the way people do when chaos is something they're trained to walk into. I heard the woman. Her voice, fragile now, thin and stretched like a thread close to snapping. She tried to explain, but the words tumbled over themselves, tangled with fear. Daniel murmured something too, but the tone was different. Not confident, not charming, just panicked, as if the situation had outgrown the lies he'd been feeding it. For a moment, I wondered what this must look like from outside, from the neighbors' houses, from the street ignited by flashing lights. I imagined the whispers beginning even now, but the truth had already moved past caring about witnesses. Then the pounding came again, harder this time. A firefighter's voice sharpened, "Sir, step away from the door." There was a pause, a muffled scramble, a crash, something falling inside the bedroom. More voices joined in, layered and certain, boots repositioned, tools shifted in practiced hands. "We're coming in," one of them called, his tone leaving no space for debate. A heartbeat of silence followed, then the sound of wood surrendering, a violent crack, the frame splitting, the door forcing itself open against months of secrets. The house shook with it. The kind of tremor felt more in the chest than the floor. I didn't stand, didn't climb the stairs, but I tilted my head slightly, listening to the collapse of something far more delicate than furniture. Shouts filled the hallway, commands, reassurances, a woman's cry, and layered beneath it all, a noise that once belonged to my husband. A strained, helpless sound I barely recognized. When the splintering settled and the chaos steadied into movement, the firefighters' voices softened into that controlled cadence I'd heard only in documentaries and news clips. Firm, efficient, compassion without attachment. I heard the scrape of the bedroom door against the broken frame as they pushed it wider. Then the thud of heavy boots stepping inside. Someone muttered, "Got her," followed by the soft rustle of fabric and a frightened sob. Another voice answered, "Check him. He's conscious." Daniel's voice rose, cracked and unfamiliar, a mixture of fear and disbelief. Not once did he call my name, not even in panic. The firefighters moved with sure hands, the kind that had seen this tableau before. The mess, the panic, the tangled bodies, the consequences of choices no one planned for. One of them spoke, his tone clipped, but not unkind. "Sir, stay still. We're going to help you, but you need to cooperate." Cooperate. A word that felt strange in the mouth of someone who had spent months refusing to cooperate with the truth. I imagined his face, eyes wide, hair sticking to his forehead, confusion twisting his features as if the universe itself had betrayed him. As if this, all of this, wasn't a story he'd written line by line. And for the first time that night, I felt something close to clarity. Not satisfied, not revenge, just the quiet recognition that some lies don't need to be confronted. They unravel themselves when finally touched by reality. The footsteps approached the top of the stairs, careful and slow, the weight of duty carrying them forward. Shadows moved along the wall as flashlights scanned the hallway. I remained seated, letting the soft glow of emergency lights wash over me. It felt surreal, as though I were watching someone else's life unravel from the comfort of my own couch. A firefighter's voice drifted down, gentler than the others. "Ma'am, are you down there?" I lifted my gaze toward the staircase but didn't rise. The house felt impossibly still again, holding its breath before the next truth arrived. How do you look a man in the eyes when his lies have finally been pried open by strangers in uniform? I supposed I would find out soon enough. The house felt different once the shouting stopped. Still, in a way that made even the shadows hold their breath. I sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded neatly in my lap, as the soft murmur of voices drifted down the staircase. Not frantic anymore, just tired, defeated. The hallway light flickered when someone passed in front of it, casting brief, trembling silhouettes across the living room floor. I didn't rise. I didn't lean forward. I just let the moment settle the way dust does after a long-forgotten door has finally been forced open. Upstairs, the firefighters were guiding the truth down one step at a time. The air smelled faintly of cold night wind from the front door they'd left cracked open. It drifted through the house, mixing with the scent of fear and something else. The faint, unfamiliar perfume that had clung to Daniel for weeks. The sirens outside were silent now, but their lights still pulsed gently against the curtains, washing the room in alternating shades of red and blue. Red, blue, red again, as if the house itself were breathing unevenly. I sat where I'd been all evening, knees drawn close, the blanket from earlier still pooled beside me. The weight of everything should have crushed me, but instead I felt strangely steady, like someone watching their own life from 2 steps outside of it. Footsteps sounded at the top of the stairs. Deliberate, slow, the careful rhythm of trained responders managing human fragility. Fabric rustled. Someone sniffed. Someone else whispered, "Easy, watch the rail." I knew they'd be coming down soon, 2 shadows carrying the consequences between them, and yet I couldn't bring myself to stand. Something inside me whispered that sitting still was the only thing holding the moment in place. Maybe I didn't want to interrupt. Maybe I needed to see what truth looked like when it walked into the light. The blanket-covered figure came first. A woman. Small, fragile in the way people look when the world has finally pressed too hard on them. The firefighter guiding her kept one hand at her elbow, steadying her as she descended the stairs. Her head was bowed beneath the blanket, hair falling out in soft, tangled strands. I could barely see her face, but what I did glimpse pulled at something deep inside me. Shame, fear, and a quiet acknowledgement of choices made in the dark. Her feet shuffled against the wooden steps, each movement echoing through the house like a muted confession. Behind her, 2 more firefighters supported Daniel. His shirt was half-buttoned, his hair damp with sweat. His face, pale, trembling, carried a desperation that didn't belong to the man I had married, but to someone finally caught inside the web he spun. He didn't look up. Not once. Not even when they reached the bottom step and the living room came fully into view. His gaze stayed fixed on the floor, on the pattern of the old rug we bought years ago at a summer market, back when we were 2 people who could still stand close without a secret lodged between us. The firefighter's boots hit the hardwood softly, respectful, practiced, the way people walk when they're bringing closure down the steps of someone else's home. When Daniel reached the living room floor, he hesitated for a single heartbeat, just long enough for me to see the truth flicker across his features. Not regret, not apology, just the bewildered shock of someone who couldn't quite understand how his world had collapsed so quickly. He glanced up only once, a brief, flickering look, like a man checking the weather before stepping outside, but not long enough to meet my eyes, not long enough to acknowledge me. The woman shifted beneath her blanket, her shoulders shaking with a small, contained sob. The firefighter tightened his grip around her arm, steadying her, guiding her gently toward the door. Daniel followed behind them, obedient in a way that startled me. The arrogance, the secrecy, the false confidence that had filled the house for months. All of it drained out of him, leaving only a hollow shape walking on unsteady legs. The cool night air slipped into the room when the front door opened wider. It brushed against my skin, raising goosebumps as if the world outside was reaching in, curious to see what was left of us. I didn't speak, didn't move. I let them pass. Him, her, the truth, all guided by hands that weren't mine. And in the quiet shadow of that moment, I realized something simple and painful. Sometimes the person who betrays you isn't the one who breaks you. It's the version of yourself that waited too long to let go. The front door closed gently behind them. Not a slam, not a rush, just a soft click that sounded strangely final. Outside, muffled voices carried across the night air, and the ambulance lights continued their slow pulse across the living room walls. Red, blue, red. I sat with my hands still folded in my lap, staring at the space where they'd walked by, feeling the echo of their passing more than the moment itself. The house felt bigger suddenly. Emptier. Quieter in a way that didn't hurt, but didn't comfort either. Was this closure, or the quiet breath before something deeper began to unravel? The question lingered in the stillness, soft as a whisper. What happens next when the truth finally leaves the room? The street emptied slowly, the way a crowd leaves a funeral. Quiet, respectful, as if sound itself had grown tired. I stood at the window long after the emergency truck disappeared around the corner, watching the last pulse of red and blue fade from the pavement. The night felt oddly clean, washed, rinsed of everything it had held just an hour before. When I finally stepped away from the glass, the house shifted around me, boards relaxing, pipes settling, the old heater humming low again. I could almost swear the walls sighed, like they were relieved the noise had gone with them. I walked through the living room slowly, trailing my fingers along the familiar furniture. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The blanket still lay folded at the arm of the couch. The lamp still cast its soft glow over the carpet. My mug sat cold on the table. Tea long forgotten. But the air felt lighter. Like a weight I'd carried for months had finally been set down somewhere outside the front door. The quiet had a different texture now. Not the brittle kind that cracks under denial, but the soft kind that holds space for whatever comes next. I moved toward the staircase, my steps gentle on the wood. Each stair creaked like it remembered the night too well, but I kept climbing, one slow breath at a time. Upstairs, the hallway smelled faintly of perfume and sweat and fear, the kind of smell that clings to fabric after panic has passed through it. I paused at the bedroom doorway before entering, letting the moment stretch, letting the truth settle fully into my bones. This was the room where the world had split open. Now it waited for me to walk across the threshold and see what was left. The room was a mess. Not chaotic, just disrupted in a way that told a story without speaking. The blanket that had once covered her lay crumpled near the bed. 2 pillows were on the floor, one with a small tear at the corner, stuffing peeking out like a wound. The nightstand had been knocked sideways, scattering receipts, old pens, a forgotten watch, an unopened letter. The sheet on the bed was twisted tight, like someone had tried to gather safety in their fists and failed. I stepped inside, my hand grazing the doorframe for balance, though the floor was steady. The scent was heavier here, lavender from her scarf, mixed with the sharpness of adrenaline and the lingering hint of Daniel's cologne. It all blended into something I couldn't quite name, something like the smell of endings. Then my gaze landed on the bedside drawer. It hung open just a few inches, the same way I had left it days ago when I replaced the contents of the bottle, as though waiting for me to finish what I started. I walked toward it, each step slow, deliberate, my heartbeat strangely calm. The bottle lay on its side, empty now, its purpose undone. a hollow container that once held the weight of a truth neither of us wanted to acknowledge. I reached for it. The bottle felt warm in my hand, as if the room still remembered the chaos from earlier. But when I tipped it, there was nothing. No glue, no residue, no proof of what had unfolded. Just silence inside clear plastic. Funny how something that once felt so heavy could feel weightless now, meaningless, like a tool that served its purpose and then surrendered. I held it for a long moment, turning it slowly between my fingers. The light from the hallway caught its surface, making it glint, small, harmless, almost innocent. But innocence wasn't something this room carried anymore. Not for him, not for her, not for the version of me that had lived here before tonight. I crossed to the small trash bin in the corner and placed the bottle inside. Not tossed, not thrown, placed. Gently, like setting down the last piece of a memory I no longer had to hold. The act felt final in a way nothing else had. Not the sirens, not the shattering door, not the look Daniel never gave me. Just this, letting an object rest where it belonged. Letting the truth stay exactly where it landed without trying to fix it or fight it. When I straightened, the house shifted again. A soft creak in the ceiling, a long sigh in the floorboards, as if it too felt the release. I stepped back into the hallway and turned off the bedroom light. The darkness inside the room was gentle now, no longer sharp or accusing. At the top of the stairs, I paused. The living room glowed faintly below, warm and still, waiting, not demanding. My hand rested on the banister, fingers curling around the wood that had supported me through so many quiet climbs and quiet descents. Tonight, it felt like the first step of something new, something honest. The night air drifted through the cracked window, cool against my skin, reminding me that morning would come whether I was ready or not. And in that small, steady moment, I asked myself the question I had been avoiding all night. What does a woman rebuild once the truth finally stays where it lands? I didn't know yet, but I knew I would.